November 1943, somewhere deep in the jungles of New Guinea, and Private Daniel Mitchell is lying face down in the mud, watching a line of Japanese soldiers walk past him so close he can hear their breathing. He's been tracking enemy patrols for 3 weeks now as a scout for the 32nd Infantry Division, and he's learned something that most American soldiers haven't figured out yet. The Japanese don't just search the jungle randomly hoping to find Americans. They follow boot prints. Every single American boot leaves a distinctive tread pattern in the soft jungle floor, a pattern completely different from Japanese footwear, and enemy trackers can spot these prints from 20 feet away even in low light. Mitchell watches as a Japanese patrol leader stops, kneels down, and points at a set of boot prints heading west toward the American lines. The patrol changes direction immediately, following those prints like bloodhounds on a scent. Mitchell's hands are shaking because those are his boot prints from yesterday, and he suddenly realizes he's been leaving a trail straight back to friendly positions every single time he goes out on patrol. The Japanese soldier examining those tracks stands up, says something to his squad, and they start moving faster, following the trail with confidence that makes Mitchell's stomach turn. He'd thought he was being careful, moving quietly through the jungle, avoiding open ground, but he'd been marking his path the entire time like leaving breadcrumbs for the enemy to follow. As the patrol disappears into the jungle, Mitchell starts thinking about something crazy, something that might be brilliant or might just get him killed, but he can't shake the idea. What if he could make his boot prints lie? What if he could create a trail that looked like Americans were going one direction when they were actually going the opposite way? He crawls backward through the mud, careful not to make any sound, and when he's far enough away, he starts walking back toward base. But this time he's watching every step, studying how his boots press into the soft earth and leave their telltale pattern. Quick thing before we continue, hit subscribe if you want more incredible World War II stories like this, because we're building something special here at WW2 Vault, and you definitely don't want to miss what's coming next. Mitchell gets back to base just before dark, and instead of reporting for chow, he goes straight to his tent and starts experimenting. He puts his boots on backward, toes where his heels should be, heels pointing forward, and tries to walk. It's awkward as hell and he falls twice, but after 20 minutes of practice he figures out how to move without breaking his ankles. He walks about 50 yards away from his tent, then turns around and looks at the trail he's left. The boot prints point toward his tent, but he'd walked away from it. The prints show someone moving in the exact opposite direction from where he'd actually gone. He stands there staring at those backwards prints as the sun sets, and he realizes he's holding something dangerous, a deception so simple that it seems stupid, but so effective that it could change everything. The Japanese trust boot prints completely because boot prints don't lie, except now they could. The next morning Mitchell goes to his commanding officer, Captain Robert Hayes, and tries to explain his idea. Hayes looks at him like he's lost his mind, asks him if the jungle heat has cooked his brain, but Mitchell is insistent enough that Hayes agrees to let him try one small test. Mitchell will create a false trail leading away from American positions, and they'll watch to see if any Japanese patrols follow it. If it works, they'll talk about using it for something bigger. If it doesn't work, Mitchell will stop wasting everyone's time with crazy ideas. Mitchell takes the deal, and that afternoon he heads out into the jungle wearing his boots backward, walking with that strange awkward gait he'd practiced the night before. He creates a trail that appears to show 3 or 4 Americans retreating southeast, away from the American defensive line and deeper into Japanese-controlled territory. He walks for 2 miles, marking the trail clearly, making sure the boot prints are deep and obvious. Then he carefully puts his boots on correctly and circles back through heavy brush that won't hold prints. 2 days later, a Japanese patrol of about 30 men follows that false trail for 5 miles before they realize something is wrong and turn back. American observers watch the whole thing through field glasses, and when Mitchell reports back to Hayes, the captain's attitude has completely changed. Hayes sees what Mitchell sees, that this isn't just a cute trick for avoiding patrols. This could be used offensively to lead Japanese forces exactly where the Americans want them to go. The two of them start planning something ambitious, something that could work exactly once before the Japanese figured it out, but that one time could be devastating. They're going to use Mitchell's backwards boot trick to lead a large Japanese force directly into a prepared ambush. And if it works the way they're hoping, it could break enemy operations in their entire sector for weeks. The plan takes 5 days to set up, and every detail has to be perfect because they're only going to get one shot at this. Intelligence reports say there's a Japanese battalion of about 200 to 250 men operating in the area, and they've been aggressive lately, pushing patrols closer to American lines, probing for weaknesses. Hayes picks an ambush site 3 miles east of the American perimeter, a narrow ravine with steep sides covered in thick jungle, the kind of terrain where soldiers have to move in column formation because there's no room to spread out. His men spend 2 days positioning themselves on both sides of that ravine, digging in carefully, camouflaging their positions with jungle vegetation, setting up machine guns with overlapping fields of fire that will turn the ravine floor into a kill zone. They bring up extra ammunition, grenades, and even a mortar team, and they do all of this at night so Japanese scouts won't spot the movement. While Hayes is setting up the ambush, Mitchell is creating the bait, and this is where his backwards boot trick becomes art. He doesn't just create one false trail, he creates the story of a patrol that got separated from their unit and is now retreating in panic. He starts close to the Japanese-held territory and walks backward toward the ravine, but he doesn't walk in a straight line. He staggers the trail, makes it weave like men who are exhausted and lost, adds boot prints that show someone falling down, creates a spot where it looks like the patrol stopped to rest. He even fires a few rifle shots into trees along the trail to make it look like there was a brief firefight, and he leaves behind an empty ammunition can and a torn piece of American uniform cloth. The whole trail tells a story that Japanese trackers will read like a book. A story about Americans who are beaten, disorganized, and running scared. It takes him 8 hours of walking backward through the jungle, concentrating on every step, making sure the deception is perfect. The trail leads directly to the ravine where Hayes has positioned his men, but Mitchell doesn't stop there. He walks through the ravine and continues the false trail for another half-mile on the other side, making it look like the American patrol went straight through and kept running. Then he circles back through the heavy brush, meets up with Hayes and the ambush team, and they settle into wait. They wait for 18 hours, and Mitchell is starting to think maybe the Japanese won't take the bait. Maybe they're more cautious than he thought, but then scouts report movement. A large Japanese force is moving through the jungle, and they're following Mitchell's trail. Not just following it, they're moving fast, excited, because everything about that trail says easy prey. November 8th, just after dawn, and the first Japanese soldiers enter the ravine. The Americans watch them come, 70, 80, 100 men moving in column formation, rifles ready but not expecting contact because they think they're chasing a beaten enemy. More soldiers keep coming, filing into the ravine, and Hayes waits because he wants as many enemy troops in the kill zone as possible before he springs the trap. He's counting under his breath, estimating numbers, watching as the ravine fills with Japanese soldiers who have no idea they're walking into a slaughter. When he estimates about 200 men are in the ravine, he gives the signal. The jungle explodes with gunfire from both sides simultaneously, machine guns and rifles firing down into the trapped soldiers, and the Japanese formation disintegrates into chaos within seconds. The ambush is absolutely devastating because the Japanese have nowhere to go. The ravine walls are too steep to climb quickly, and when soldiers try to run forward or backward, they're running deeper into American fields of fire. Officers try to organize a response, but they can't be heard over the gunfire and screaming. Some soldiers attempt to return fire, but they can't see where the Americans are positioned in the jungle above them. They're just shooting blindly at muzzle flashes while bullets tear through their formation. The mortar team starts dropping shells into the rear of the Japanese column, cutting off any retreat, and now the enemy force is completely boxed in with American guns firing from 3 sides. Men are falling everywhere, the ravine floor is becoming slick with blood, and the Japanese who aren't hit are pressing themselves against the dirt trying to find any cover that doesn't exist. The firefight lasts 12 minutes from first shot to last, though it probably feels like hours to the Japanese soldiers trapped in that ravine. When the shooting finally stops and the smoke begins to clear, Hayes orders his men to hold position while scouts move carefully down to assess the situation. What they find is carnage on a scale none of them have seen before. Bodies are scattered the entire length of the ravine, over 150 Japanese soldiers killed in the ambush, with only about 40 managing to escape into the jungle, and those survivors are scattered, disorganized, their unit completely shattered. On the American side, 4 men are wounded, none seriously, because the Japanese never had a chance to mount any effective resistance. It's the kind of one-sided victory that seems impossible, except it happened, and it happened because Mitchell convinced 200 enemy soldiers to walk directly into American guns by using boot prints that lied. The aftermath of the ambush reveals just how completely the Japanese were fooled by Mitchell's deception. When American patrols sweep the area over the next few days, they find evidence that Japanese officers had been tracking the false trail carefully, even stopping to examine the boot prints and discuss which direction the Americans were heading. One Japanese officer's body is found with a notebook that contains detailed sketches of American boot prints and notes about tracking techniques. The Americans send the notebook back to intelligence, and translators discover the officer had written that American soldiers were undisciplined in their retreat and easy to track through jungle terrain. He'd been so confident in his tracking skills that he'd led his entire battalion directly into an ambush without suspecting anything was wrong, and that confidence had killed him and most of his men. The story of Mitchell's backwards boot trick spreads through American units in the Pacific faster than any official communication could travel. Other scouts start experimenting with the technique, adapting it to their own situations, using it to create false trails that lead Japanese patrols away from actual American positions or toward smaller ambushes. Mitchell himself uses the trick 8 more times over the next month, never with results as dramatic as that first major ambush, but always successfully, leading small Japanese patrols into bad situations where Americans have the advantage. But the trick has a limited lifespan because the Japanese eventually figure out what's happening. After the 3rd or 4th ambush that involves boot print trails leading to kill zones, Japanese intelligence officers examine the tracks more carefully and discover that some of the boot prints are backward. They issue warnings to all units about American deception tactics involving reversed footprints, and suddenly Japanese patrols stop trusting boot prints entirely. Trackers become paranoid, suspicious of any trail that seems too obvious or too easy to follow. The backwards boot trick stopped working in Mitchell's sector by late December 1943, but by then the damage to Japanese operations had already been done. Units that had been aggressive and confident are now cautious and slow, second-guessing every piece of evidence their scouts bring back, losing the initiative because they can't trust the intelligence they're gathering. The psychological impact is almost as important as the tactical victories, because Mitchell hasn't just killed enemy soldiers, he's made them afraid of their own tracking skills, made them question the basic fieldcraft that jungle warfare depends on. Japanese commanders start requiring multiple scouts to confirm trails independently before patrols will follow them, which slows down their operations and makes them predictable. American intelligence estimates that Mitchell's deception campaign, from that first major ambush through all the smaller follow-up operations, killed or wounded around 230 Japanese soldiers while degrading enemy reconnaissance capabilities across multiple sectors. Captain Hayes puts Mitchell in for a Silver Star, writing in the commendation that Mitchell had demonstrated extraordinary initiative and tactical innovation that resulted in significant enemy casualties and disruption of enemy operations. The medal gets approved, and when they pin it on Mitchell's uniform, he's embarrassed by all the attention because from his perspective he just tried walking backward in boots and got lucky that it worked. But Hayes understands what most people miss, that the real genius wasn't the trick itself but recognizing the opportunity in the first place. Mitchell had noticed that Japanese soldiers trusted boot prints absolutely, and instead of just avoiding leaving prints, he'd figured out how to weaponize that trust, turn it against them, use their own confidence and skill to lead them into disaster. That kind of tactical thinking, Seeing not just what is but what could be separates average soldiers from the ones who change how wars are fought. The backwards boot trick eventually makes it into official Army Scout training manuals, though it's taught more as a historical example than a current tactic since the Japanese adjusted their procedures after discovering the deception. Mitchell survives the war, comes home to Oregon, and rarely talks about his time in the Pacific because, like many veterans, he finds that the reality of jungle combat doesn't translate well to civilian conversation. When he does mention the boot trick, usually people think he's exaggerating or making it up because it sounds too simple, too much like something from a movie. But the after-action reports are real, the casualty figures are documented, and somewhere in Army archives there's still that Japanese officer's notebook with sketches of American boot prints and confident notes about tracking that turned out to be tragically wrong. What happened in that ravine in New Guinea shows something important about warfare that's easy to forget when we focus on big battles and famous generals. Sometimes the most devastating weapons aren't tanks or planes or artillery, they're ideas, simple innovations that exploit enemy assumptions and turn their strengths into weaknesses. The Japanese were excellent trackers, among the best jungle fighters of World War II, and that skill had served them well throughout the Pacific Campaign. But Mitchell turned that skill against them by understanding something fundamental about how people think. When you're good at something, when you've relied on a skill successfully for years, you stop questioning it, and that's when you're most vulnerable to someone who sees that skill differently. The Japanese trusted boot prints because boot prints had never lied to them before, and that trust killed over 150 men in 12 minutes. Thanks for watching this story about how one scout's simple trick changed jungle warfare in the Pacific. If you enjoyed this, hit that like button and subscribe to WW2 Vault because next week we're covering the moment a single American tank crew held off an entire German company for 9 hours. And trust me, you won't believe how they did it. We tell stories like this every week, the incredible true moments of World War II that show how ordinary soldiers did extraordinary things when everything was on the line.